that's going to be a good place to look when the glass is in the flame. You can notice already that as I'm melting the glass, there is a bright orange glare around the flame. That is called soda flare, because it's a little bit of sodium that's burning away as the glass melts. And the sodium comes from one of the ingredients in glass, which is called soda ash. That's a mineral. Soda flare is not going to harm your vision. You can look at it if you want to. And while you're looking at it, the first thing you're going to notice is, well, that is mighty hard to see through. That's why the camera comes in handy. There's a filter on the camera lens that is filtering out the soda flare. I have that same filter in my eyeglasses, and it's the same filter that's in this little rectangular frame in the central window there. So when the glass is in the flame, you will have a clearer view of it by looking up at the screen. And then that's kind of the key, is that sometimes the glass is in the flame and sometimes it's not going to be in the flame. So you're going to be able to just pick and choose your best view as we go along. You can look through any of the windows of the booth. And that means if you like a really close view, you can come stand right on either side next to me. If you're sitting where you can see through this rectangular frame, that's an option. And if you're looking up at the screen, you have a filtered view, which is also magnified. That's going to be good because I'm going to be doing some pretty delicate detail work. So, welcome to the flame working area. My name's Caitlin. I'm going to make a little sculpture of a bear this afternoon. Starting out with solid rods of glass in my hands, and that is a 4,000 degree flame in front of me.
Oh.
So 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that's a pretty high temperature. And to produce that much heat, my torch is burning natural gas. That's like you'd have for a gas stove. And by itself, that's not really hot enough to melt glass very efficiently. And so we also add lots of compressed oxygen to the flame. You've probably heard this before. Oxygen is an accelerant for flame, right? It means it makes it burn hotter.
Oh my God.
And so that's how we're getting that real high temperature. And that's good because the glass I'm using, this glass is called borosilicate, melts at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's got a high melting temperature compared to some other types of glass. But I do have a 4,000 degree flame, so that's plenty of heat to get the glass soft really quickly. One of the other useful things that the oxygen is doing in this situation is to push the heat away from you. That's a very directed flame, which means there's just not that much heat coming off the sides of it. So you see how close I can put my hand to that? That's not because I have super tough hands. You could put your hand close to it too, because most of the heat is going that way. There really isn't that much coming off the sides. And so that explains how I'm working so close to that very hot flame. But you know what else it means? I can be very specific about which parts of the glass get soft. The glass has to be directly in that flame to soften. This part next to the flame, it's really hot. You wouldn't want to touch it, but it's not hot enough to make it soft. And so the glass rod is holding its shape even though I'm melting the end of it. When you melt glass, it's going to tend to form a round shape. And so each step of the way, I'm starting with a round bit of glass. We call that a gather. So I just gathered up some glass for a leg, attached it, I'm stretching it a little. Glass is very stretchy when it's at its melting temperature, and it softens gradually. So I can work with different parts of it at different temperatures, and they're going to behave in very different ways. So you can see a good example of that here. This leg that I'm working on in the back, it was a little thin, so I just added a little bit of glass to it. So it's glowing, I can stretch it. When it's soft like that, it's pretty close to the melting temperature. So that's right around 3,000 degrees. The body of the bear is all firmed up already. It's nice and hard. We know it's hot though, right? Because I was melting that thing a minute ago. That's still well over 1,000 degrees right now, but at that temperature, this glass is not soft. And then there's this part that I'm holding. It's all one piece of glass, but where I'm holding it, it's not soft. and it's also not hot. So that's at least 3 distinctly different areas of temperature there in that one piece of glass. Each one is serving its own purpose at any given moment, and I can very quickly and precisely soften and harden different parts as I go along. That's how I can adjust the shape. So speaking of adjusting shape, sometimes people ask me questions like, how do you know how much glass to add? Or how do you get the legs to all match perfectly? And I don't. Because I'm a human being like everybody. I don't know how to do anything perfectly. So what I do know that I can tell you about is I'm estimating. So every step of the way, I'm looking at the glass, I'm thinking, well, how much glass do I think I need for that part? And how long do I think I need to heat that? And I'm watching the color of the glow of heat in the glass, I'm watching the movement of the glass, and my estimates are pretty good because I've been doing this a long time. But what I really know is the bear has 4 legs. And so that's 4 estimates. That means once those legs are on there, I'm pretty confident they're not going to match exactly. And they might not be in exactly the position that I want. So I take a careful look at them and start thinking about what might I want to adjust. Now, I just looked at the 2 back legs. I had touched the feet down to the table. The back legs looked like they match pretty well. And so I started heating to gather the glass up for the feet. And what I found was one of the legs was a little thinner than the other, and so the foot wasn't as big by the time I gathered it up. So I just added a little bit of glass there. So the adjustments are simple and logical. You know, I can add some glass, I can take some away, bend a leg, stretch a leg, and just little by little make adjustments until everything lines up, and so the bear can stand, and so the glass can be as beautiful as possible. You know, when I'm sculpting solid glass like this, I think of it as being very similar to clay. You know, if you've ever made anything out of clay or Play-Doh, if you've ever shaped a pie crust or bread dough, glass is like those other materials. It's squishy and soft. You can stretch it and bend it. You can smooth it out. You can attach bits to each other. You just can't touch it with your fingers because it's really, really hot. But otherwise, it's pretty similar. And so in terms of your thought process for making something, you're going to work with it in a similar way. You can see how I'm using that directionality of the flame that I talked about here. I want to soften up just the front feet, and so I can kind of sneak up to the edge of the flame and manage to heat just those toes so that I can shape them while I'm keeping the rest of the bear out of the flame, and so the rest of it is just holding its shape. All right, so now we got 4 feet on the ground. There's the body and the tail, and there is a big handle sticking out in the front. I need to melt the handle off. I need to hold on to the bear while I melt the handle off. And the bear is nice and firm now, but it is hot still. It's about 1,000 degrees right now. And so I'm not going to grab it with my fingers. Instead, I'm going to put a temporary handle on the belly, and then I can melt the handle off the front, gather the glass for the neck and the head. Now, this is one of the things that I think is especially appealing about this technique. The glass rod is the sculpting material. That's what I'm melting to shape the bear from. It's also the handle. Sometimes I'm using it almost like a paintbrush or a spatula to move glass around. And the very same piece of glass changes its job description from 1 minute to the next. That's why I have several pieces of glass on the table. I've got thin ones and thick ones and different colors. So you'll often see me kind of cleaning up or reshaping the end of a glass rod, getting it ready for its next job. The glass rod gets shorter as I'm working with it because, of course, I'm transferring glass from that rod to the sculpture. And when it gets to the point where it's a little too short to hold on to, I just melt the end of it and attach it to another piece of glass, and then I can just keep using it and use it all up. So there's very little waste in this process because I can use almost every bit of each of the pieces of glass. Heat doesn't travel through glass very fast. I bet you guessed that already just watching this. So even though the bear's head is 3,000 degrees right now, and here's a really short piece of glass, I'm going to heat the end of that up to 3,000 degrees too. But heat moves so slowly through glass that there's actually plenty of surface area there between the hot glass and my hand for the heat to just keep escaping into the air before it ever gets to me. Air is more conductive than glass. So you can sort of imagine, as the heat is traveling through that glass toward my hand, as soon as it gets to where it's exposed to the air, it's just going to change direction and go out into the air instead of traveling down the length of the rod. So even if I heat that for a long time, the part that I'm holding is going to stay room temperature. And I know that seems kind of surprising if you're not familiar with it, but it is actually a natural characteristic of glass. This is a technique that's been around for thousands of years, but it would never have developed if it wasn't for that characteristic of the glass. But you can imagine 4,000 years ago or so, when people were figuring out how to make glass, it wouldn't have taken very long for someone to realize that if you had a thin piece of glass that was cool, you could take hold of it, heat up the end of it, and then that would open the door to all kinds of interesting processes for shaping things. This is a piece of black glass, by the way. I'm using that for the eyes and the nose. There are two types of connections when you work with hot glass. One's called a hot seal. The hot seal is permanent because you get both surfaces that you're joining hot enough that they flow together. And when they flow together, they become one piece of glass. So it's nice and stable. Just going to shape the ears, and then I'll show you what that hot seal looks like. All right, so if you look at where the legs are attached up there on the screen, that's a good example of a hot seal because you saw me adding glass for each of those legs. But you look at the attachment points, you can see right through the glass, especially on that back leg. There's no seam there because I heated until I saw the seams dissolve. That's how I know it's a hot seal. It doesn't happen automatically. I have to watch each time. Even the eyes and the nose and the tail, everything has to be hot sealed on in order for it to stay attached. So the bear is all one solid piece of glass. But take a look at where that handle's attached. Can you see how that looks different? There is a shadow there between the handle and the belly, and from the shape of it, it looks kind of like it's just tacked on there. And in fact, it is just tacked on there. So that's called a cold seal. Remember I told you glass softens gradually. So as you're heating the glass, there comes a point where it's going to be sticky to other hot glass quite a while before it gets up to the melting temperature. And if you stick two bits together that aren't flowing, it's not very strong. So that's why it's so important to learn how to avoid accidental cold seals in your sculpture. You don't want those parts to pop off, but it's pretty useful for a temporary attachment because it comes off easily. And so I just heated it to smooth out where it was attached. And then that is our little bear. So thank you very much. Thanks for watching.